Three, two, one.
Since you've spoken so much about the Prophet, peace be upon him, which I love, how is there any story that resonates with you the most during your chaplaincy? Something that he's done or how he interacted in a social situation?
The ways that he dealt with people on a very case by case basis. And he was able, like a chaplain, to almost make an assessment of the person to gauge kind of where they are in terms of religiosity or spirituality, how much exposure they've had to religion, what kind of, was it a positive or a negative experience? What is their connection to a community, yada, yada, yada. The Bedouins were more like rustic, they were harsher. They did not have the education maybe of those in Medina and Mecca. And so he treated the man very kindly and gently, like the man didn't know. He doesn't know the etiquette of the mosque. So why rebuke him and like shun him from this place of prayer, where what you want to do is you want to bring him back in. Like you want to invite him in and make him feel welcome. So he let the man urinate. And you know, I always like think of that story in so much wonder. There's another story of the Prophet, peace be upon him, when he's speaking to Mu'adh ibn Jabal, who's a companion of the Prophet. And Mu'adh was tasked with going out into, I think it was Yemen, to begin to teach people in Yemen about Islam, because he had sat with the Prophet enough times to be able to do that. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, engaged him in this beautiful conversation around questions of like, okay, what is your source? Like when people come up to you and ask you questions, what are you going to refer back to when you need answers? And Mu'adh ibn Jabal was like, the Quran. And he's like, okay, what if you don't find the answer in the Quran? And then Mu'adh ibn Jabal kind of thought about it, and he's like, your sayings, O Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon you, peace be upon him. No, he didn't say peace be upon him. Your sayings, O Prophet. And he said, okay, what if you don't find the answer in something that I've said? And Mu'adh ibn Jabal took a moment, and he's like, then I'll consult like my own sort of like, not common sense, but my own training and upbringing, and try to make some answers from that. He said, okay, very good. When we look at the story of the Prophet, peace be upon him, it's very interesting that he could have just told Mu'adh all of this. Like he could have said, here's what you do, 1, 2, 3. But instead he engaged them and took a little bit of a longer route, so to speak, to try and get him to realize and to surface, what are the tools that you have, Mu'adh, that I have already given you? Do you know how to utilize them? And kind of not putting him to the test, but helping him kind of affirm and find and discover what he already had within himself. And that's so much of a stronger way to deal and engage with people, whether it be students or children or friends or whatever it is, to be kind of like that guiding in the conversation, rather than the prescriptive or the demanding, or like just here's the answer, do it, take it. There's more of a collaboration there. And that's actually a tool that chaplains use, is these questions that we ask to help people unearth, like what resources do you have in your life? Who's there to support you through your crisis? And when people sit and actually think about it and start naming it, there comes up this, like, it should come this aha moment. And I actually have a lot more than I thought I did. So those are just like a few stories that connect very deeply to what I do in my chaplaincy and kind of the techniques that I use. But there are so many more that speak to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's emotional intelligence and his love and just relentless love and service to his people.
Well, one story that resonates with me deeply is when he was passing by a camel, and the camel was making, I don't know if you've ever heard a camel, but they don't make very nice noises. I don't like the way they sound. Many people don't, but the Prophet, peace be upon him, through God, was able to understand this camel, and advise the man who owned the camel not to overwork it and not to underfeed it. And why that resonates with me so deeply is because how many people walked by that camel and heard its voice, and to it, it's just sounded like a camel that was making a lot of noise, and someone shut it up. And so in my mind all the time, I'm going, how many camels quote as a metaphor out there that I would look at, and first glance I'm thinking, stop talking, or you're loud, or you're irritating me. But really, it's a cry for help. It's a cry for justice. And that's why he was truly, like, he was able to see what we couldn't see. You mentioned death and understanding life through death. And even in your own book, you say that you find yourself often at the intersection of life and death. What have you learned about life as a chaplain?
Life is fleeting. There is nothing in this life that remains except God. Everything has an expiration date. And I know I say that and it sounds very like, duh, of course. But that was a lesson I learned very deeply. To not get attached to people and things. And now even like we got a pet 2 years ago. And every time I look at our pet, I think to myself, man, I'm going to miss you when you die. Like that's already where my mind is. It's like, you will not be here forever. I am going to appreciate every moment that I have with you right now, even if it's so annoying to try and take care of you because you have so many needs. I really cherish the blessings and the comfort that you give me. And I'm going to miss you when you're gone. That's a small example, but take that to anybody who's in our lives. Like you think about your parents, you think about maybe spouse or your kids or relatives or your best friend. Like, what would it be like to encounter them with that thought in the back of your head? And like, this isn't going to be forever. This is going to, like, you're going to die, or I'm going to die first, and then I won't have you anymore, and I won't have this. It really helps to ground us in the moment. So the big buzzword these days is, mindfulness and being present and all of that. Well, what way will bring you more in the present and in the moment than thinking this will never manifest the way it is going to ever again, the way that it is in this moment. And so I'm going to cherish it with everything that I have, because it's just not forever. That's one. And then two is, when we look at the other part of that statement, everything is fleeting in this life. Everything has an expiration date except for Allah, except for God. Then where are we going to invest our time? Are we going to invest our time and our emotion and our energy in the things and the people and the attachments that are fleeting and that are going to perish? Or are we going to kind of reroute our thinking and our energy to the one that is everlasting? The one where our relationship began way beyond we took on these physical flesh bodies, where our soul was with the one before all of this, and our soul will return to that one after all of this, and will remain for all of eternity, like forever and ever and ever. Our mind can't even grasp that. Which relationship do we need to invest in the most? And so those were kind of two really life-changing lessons for me in terms of life that came through experiencing death.
It's so interesting to hear you say that, because it reminded me exactly of the advice that Angel Jibril, gave to the Prophet, peace be upon him. And he told him, "Oh Prophet, this, peace be upon him, this is away from revelation. I'm not speaking in the realm of revelation. I'm actually speaking on a personal level." Mm-hmm. And he said, "Oh Muhammad, peace be upon you, live as you will, for you must surely die. Work as you will, or do as you will, and know that you will surely be recompensated for it accordingly. Love whoever you will, and know that you will surely lose them. And know that the nobility of the believer is his prayer at night, and his honor is his independence of the people." And I think that speaks beautifully to what you were saying. How about death? What did you learn about death through your work in chaplaincy?
Death is messy. Death is complicated. Death is nothing like what they show in the movies of just this like eventual passing away. There's so many interventions that we have medically at the time of death, so much fear of death, of the unknown, and a lot of suffering that comes out of that fear.
Fear from the one dying.
Fear of maybe of the person who is going to die, and not having a solid religious understanding of what happens, or maybe an understanding of life after death. There's no hope, Mahmoud. When I say that, I think of a patient who I saw who had been severely disabled, basically crippled from the neck down since the age of maybe 5 or 6, and he was in his 30s. So you can imagine almost 3 decades of having somebody else do every single function for you. Brushing teeth, eating, getting dressed, using the bathroom. I mean, anything that you can think of, right? I think he had enough mobility in his arm to be able to eventually maneuver a cell phone, so he could be on his smartphone, but that was basically it. And he needed to use something to help him vocalize and to speak. But my point is, when I was sitting with him, it was just the heaviness of the room. It was just, there was such heaviness there. And he was taking medication for depression and whatnot, and just saying I'm just going to stop all this treatment and I'm just going to die. I have no reason to live. There's no purpose. There's no meaning in living a life like this. And when we got through our conversation, I realized he never really grew up with religion. He didn't really believe in God. And so he had no informal or formal understanding of anything that would happen after this life. So he couldn't attach any of the suffering and any of the pain that he was going through. There was no real substantive meaning to what he had experienced in his life, translating it to an afterlife, right? Or connecting it to something better beyond. And the most he could hope for, and I remember not pushing him to this, but really trying to understand, what, do you have any belief of anything that happens after death, or do you just die and that's it? We kind of just die. And he said, well, I maybe believe that, or want to believe that I'll come back as something else. And maybe a better body, or maybe an animal that flies. And when he started to think about that, he got very emotional and being and for me, I was very emotional too, to think that's it, that's your only hope. That maybe you'll come back in a different body and have to go through this life again. I wouldn't want to do this over again. This life is just full of suffering and hardship and trials and tribulations. But that was as much as he could grasp onto. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is when I'm able to be present with people who have faith, very strong, deep conviction about God and returning to Him, and some understanding of an afterlife, that whatever sickness or whatever death pangs or whatever experience that they have leading up to death is okay for them. It's not scary. It's like a reunion. I'm going to meet my Creator. I'm going to heaven. Yes, I'm going to miss everybody here, but I have patience when I have one-on-ones with them. Those who have very deep faith will say, I just can't wait. I'm so happy. I've suffered for so long. And now I get to be reunited with my Creator, and I get to be in heaven. And please let my family know to be happy for me, because I'm going to be in a good place. Think of that approach versus the first one that I mentioned, that this idea of hope that permeates. And so when I think of death experiences, especially for people who have some sort of framework to place it in, what is the purpose of death? And what is the purpose of life in relation to death, and what happens after death? If you have some information, it's not as scary anymore. It's not as unknown. We kind of have an idea of what to expect. And what to expect if we lived a life righteously and we have belief in God and all of that, we're promised, eternal salvation. And that's something that's beautiful to look forward to.
It's so beautiful to hear you say that, because one of the ways that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God describes the Quran and Islam is that it's a bushra. It's good news. Like here's good news. You're not going to turn into a bird afterwards. You're not going to just not exist anymore. You actually have a place to go to. It's not just suffering. You're not just going to be here to suffer. Um, it's interesting because when I was younger and I heard like the Quran is good news, I was like, the Quran is good news. What do you mean? You're telling me not to do things that I want to do. And here's how it's good news, at least one of the ways.